Chapter 24 of The Lady of the North Star by Ottwell, BINNS. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Prodigal makes good. Dick insisted, explained Corporal Bracknell, as with Joy and her foster sister and the boy Jim he fled down the river. I could see he wanted the post of danger, and I could not refuse. Sibou is with him, and I think they will hold the pursuit. For a moment Joy did not speak. She was thinking of the consideration Dick Bracknell had shown to her during the last 2 days, and understood quite well that now he was endeavoring to atone for the wrong he had once done her. Pity surged in her heart as she thought of him, weak and ill, holding back a horde of savage men. Pity and gratitude, but no warmer emotion, for Dick Bracknell had killed all possibility of that in that moment at Alcombe when, on her marriage morning, she had made that startling discovery of his perfidy. "Do you think that Dick will get away also?" she asked at last. "I hope so," the corporal answered evasively. "I made him promise not to stay too long. But he's a sick man, and in the mood for anything. I believe he rejoiced at the prospect of a fight against odds. It is not surprising, and listen! There they go again. They were both together that time." From time to time, as they raced hotfoot down the trail, the reports of rifles reached them, and they knew that the fight was still proceeding, and that the 2 defenders were holding their own. Once, when the interval between the shots was especially long, Corporal Bracknell's face grew very thoughtful, and so absorbed and intent was he that Joy addressed a question to him twice before he heard her. "Corporal Bracknell, do you think that Dick can recover from his sickness?" "I am afraid not," replied the corporal slowly, then gave an ejaculation as the distant report of a rifle broke the silence behind them. "Good! They're still keeping it up." "Why do you think that?" she asked. "Because I have seen other men like it. I have never known one to recover." Do you think Dick knows?" "Yes," he answered quietly. "I am sure of it." "It is very pitiful," she said. "He is not all bad." "He is very far from being that," interrupted the corporal. "He might have made good even yet, if he were not so sick." "Perhaps he is making good," replied the corporal gently. "Yes," she answered simply. "I think he is trying. In spite of the past, I shall be in his debt." "Ah! What is that?" There had been a sudden increase of clamour behind them. Distant yells were sounding, and the 2 rifles were firing in rapid succession. For perhaps a minute and a half this went on. Then came silence, followed by a single shot, and that again by a silence which remained unbroken. Corporal Bracknell stopped irresolutely. "What do you think?" Joy whispered. "I think it is the end one way or the other," was the reply. "The last yells sounded as if the Indians were charging. In that case, unless the rush was stopped—" "Dick and your man are dead?" "Something of that kind. I think I must go back and try and learn what has happened. There is nothing else for it. I simply can't desert them without knowing what has befallen. You keep right on until you reach the main river. I will not be longer than necessary." "We shall wait at the fork," she answered quickly. "But—" "We shall wait," she repeated resolutely, and taking a rifle from one of the sleds, she handed it to him. "You may need it," she said quietly, "and we have one left yet." He did not speak, but nodding his thanks, turned in the tracks and proceeded up river once more. He went swiftly but cautiously, and after travelling half an hour, caught sight of a lumpy shadow coming down the river. Hastily he took refuge against the bank and waited with his rifle ready. The shadow drew nearer, and then he perceived that it was made up of 2 men, one riding on the back of the other. At the same time he caught the sound of a protesting voice. "It's not worth while, old horse. Put me down and quit, they say." A moment later Roger Bracknell was running towards them. "Dick! Dick!" he cried gladly. Where are the girls? Joy?" asked his cousin in a voice that sounded harsh. "They are all right. They are well in front." "Good. There was a note of relief in Dick Bracknell's voice as he spoke. Then he gave a little laugh. "Behold the victors, Roger, my son. It was topping. We stood a charge and cleared the board. It was gorgeous." He laughed weakly, and his cousin looked at him anxiously. "But you were hurt, Dick, old man." "Plugged with an arrow in the ribs. Sibou's all right, though, and I tried to make him leave me on the field of glory, but he's a mutinous beggar." Weak though he was, there was a reckless gaiety in his manner, which almost moved the corporal to tears. "Dick, don't you think you had better not talk? It is bound to try you as you are. When we get to the sleds, I will look to your wound, and—" "Not a bit of use, Roger, my boy. I know it, you know it. This finishes me. It was a matter of weeks before. Now it's a matter of hours. All the same, I'd like to see Joy before—" "You shall, if it is to be done," said his cousin, as the other's voice broke. "I'll take turns with Sibou. Between us we'll do it, somehow. And I might as well take part of my share now. Sibou must be fagged." They stopped and the transfer was effected. Then as they resumed their way, the wounded man leaned over his cousin's shoulder and whispered, "Roger, you're a good sort." The corporal made no response, and Dick Bracknell continued, "You know that Joy was up here looking for you?" "The boy Jim told me so, though why she should—" She came to tell you that Jeff was dead, that you are the heir of Harrow Fell." "No, no," broke out his cousin in sharp protest. "Yes, yes, it is so. I've been out of it since, for years. And in any case I shall be out of it altogether very soon. But it wasn't for that only Joy came. She came up here to stop you from killing me. Knowing the relation between us, she was afraid that if that happened, people would say that you understand." "Yes, I think I understand." "Such a possibility was rather rot, of course, but Joy didn't know that, and she knew that you were after me, so she's pure gold, Joy is." "Yes," agreed the corporal simply. "You'll marry her, of course, and go to the Fell?" Roger Bracknell hesitated. The conversation was inexpressibly painful to him, and to this question he did not know what answer to make. His cousin did not seem to notice the hesitation, and he did not wait for an answer, but continued in a broken way. "There have been Bracknells at the Fell these 500 years, and Jeff's gone, and I'm going, but you'll keep up the line. When you've a boy, Roger, call him Dick. I'd like to think there'll be one of my name who'll be as clean and straight as I've been crooked. Lord, what a mess a man can make of life! And what a difference it would have made if only I'd gone straight at the fences. But would it? Joy would never have married me. She never loved me. But you have her heart. Oh, it is so! I'm not blind, and, Roger, old man, I'm glad it will be you." After that he was silent for a long time, to Roger's unutterable relief, and he spoke only jestingly on the occasions when Sibou and the corporal took him over from the other, and at last, after a weary march, they reached the point where the stream joined the main river, and as they did so a figure broke from the bank and ran towards them. It was Joy. "You're all here!" she cried. "Safe?" "Safe, yes," laughed Dick wearily, "but a little damaged." "What is it?" she asked, turning towards the corporal. "Dick is wounded," he answered gravely. "I am afraid it is serious, and as I think we have little to fear from the Indians now, it will perhaps be best if we cross the main river and camp. We can put him upon one of the sleds." "Yes, yes," she cried, and a moment later she had turned to the wounded man, and was talking to him in a low voice. Roger moved away. He did not know what she was saying, and he had no wish to know. But half an hour later, as his cousin lay by a fire which had been lit, he saw that his eyes were shining with a quiet happiness. "Better, Dick?" he inquired. "In soul, yes," was the answer. "I'm glad of that," replied the corporal simply. "It's like a cleansing to have a good woman's approval. You can't know, Roger, old boy. You haven't been deep in the mire. But there it is." He allowed his cousin and Joy to examine his wound, and they found the arrow broken off in his side. The corporal looked at the girl and shook his head. There was little to be done except draw out the arrow and bandage the wound as well as they could, and when that was done the injured man was visibly weaker. Corporal Bracknell busied himself with the preparation of a meal, leaving Joy and his cousin together, and not till after the meal, when Dick was dozing, had he any opportunity of further speech with Joy. Then, walking in the shadow of the trees, he talked with her. "Dick has told me why you came," he said, going straight to his point. "I am very grateful." "I was afraid that there might be trouble between you," she answered frankly. "We had already met twice before you came," he explained quietly. "On the first occasion Dick spared my life, and on the second, though the meeting began stormily enough, we parted complete friends. I am glad of that, more glad than I can tell." "No more than I am, but there are things I want to ask you, very badly. I know how you came to go to Dick's cabin, but I do not know who those men were who kept both Dick and you there in a state of siege. Have you any idea?" As he asked the question, Joy Gargrave's face grew very thoughtful. "It was Dick's man who fastened the door on us. That was part of a plan for kidnapping me, which Dick had arranged, and at first I thought that he—" "It was not Joe. We found him shot," interrupted the corporal. "I do not think it was he now. At first Dick was inclined to that idea, and then he thought it might be my boy Jim. But I pointed out that the latter would scarcely attack Babette, and she was attacked while walking outside the hut, you know." He looked at her and saw that her eyes were full of trouble. She was keeping something back, and after a moment he pressed her for the truth. "You have suspicions, Miss Gargrave. Tell me exactly what you think." "I scarcely like to," was the reply. "What I have is no more than a suspicion, and it is almost too horrible for words." "Tell me," he urged again. "I will," she broke out impulsively, "and God forgive me if I do him wrong. I think my cousin Adrian was responsible. Mr. Rayner, you know, whom you met at North Star." "I thought so." "You thought so?" she cried. "Then you know he was up here?" "I did not know, but I guessed. I was on his trail when I met your boy Jim." "And he was on yours, I am sure," said Joy quickly. "He followed you when you left Dick's cabin. I think he meant to kill you. He knew that you suspected him of that attack on Dick at North Star." "I suspected him of worse things than that." "Yes, I know. Dick told me. Oh, how terrible it is!" She hid her face in her hands for a moment, and then, as she lifted it, he asked, "Have you any idea why he should do a thing like that, or why he should make an attempt upon you?" "Yes," she replied in a shaking voice. "Babette, who is very frank, says he wants my money. He would have married me, knowing all the time that I was married to Dick. He even threatened me when I would not accept him, and events have compelled me to the belief that Babette is right, and that he will allow nothing to stand in his way, not even my life." Roger Bracknell nodded his head thoughtfully. "I think you are right," he answered slowly. "We must be very careful. If there is real warrant for our suspicions, then Adrian Rayner will be a very desperate man." "I am sure of that," she interjected impulsively. "I felt it when he left North Star on our arrival. Did I tell you that he was there when we came back? No? Well, he was. I ordered him away, and as soon as I could I came to look for you. It was good of you to be so anxious for my welfare," he broke in quickly. They had turned and were walking back to the fire, and in the light it shed he saw her face grow suddenly crimson. She looked towards the recumbent figure of Dick Bracknell lying towards the fire, then back again to himself. "That was but natural," she said quietly. "You were working for me, and when I knew that a danger unknown to you threatened you, I felt that I must make you aware of it. You understand?" "Yes," he answered quietly, "and if we can only meet Adrian Rayner, we shall be able to prove or disprove all that we suspect. You and Babette and myself know him, and Sibou knows the man who was responsible for your father's death. If Adrian Rayner and he should prove to be the same, then the matter will be beyond dispute." "Yes," she agreed slowly. "Yes, but it will be very terrible." They approached the fire just as Dick Bracknell moved and opened his eyes. He looked at Joy, and she, reading the unspoken request in his eyes, went and seated herself by his side. Chapter 24. Chapter 25 of The Lady of the North Star by Ottwell, BINNS. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. A snow-blind man. When the next day dawned, a soft warm day, holding in it all the promise of the Northland spring, Dick Bracknell was in no condition to travel. He was clearly much weaker, and at times he lapsed into delirium, during which the hearts of the two of those with him were wrung. The feverish babble was of nothing relating to his life in the North, but about his boyhood at Harrow Fell, and of his first meeting with Joy. More than once Joy was unable to restrain her tears, and as the day wore on it was evident that the strain was telling upon her. Several times Roger Bracknell begged her to leave the sick man and rest, but she shook her head. "No," she whispered on the last occasion. "No, look at him. It will not be very long. I think I should like to be with him when it will help him, you know," she concluded hastily. "Yes," he admitted, "you are quite right. He told me in that lucid interval that these moments with you by his side were among the happiest in his life." She looked down at the drawn face, her eyes flooding with sudden tears. She did not love him, but there was a great pity in her heart for the wayward man whose life had taken the wrong turn, and whose nature, as she now knew, was as full of generous good as of desperate evil. She prayed for him silently, and leaving her with bowed head, Roger Bracknell walked slowly away. At the outer edge of the camp he met Sibou. The latter waved a hand towards the river, on the frozen surface of which tiny streams of water were beginning to run. "It is the spring," he said. "If we do not leave today, the ice may not hold." "We cannot leave today, Sibou." "No," replied the Indian. "We wait for death. Is it not so?" "It is so," agreed the corporal. "And tomorrow comes the spring and new life," said the Indian thoughtfully. "That is the way. Always death on the heels of life, and life on the heels of death." He jerked his head towards the camp. "The woman nurses the man who dies. What is she to him?" "She is his wife." "But she loves him not. I have watched her. I have seen the light in her eyes." He broke off abruptly, and again waved his hand towards the river. "But the spring comes, and with the spring comes life and the kindling of the heart." Roger Bracknell looked towards the river. He knew that the Indian's words were true, but he offered no comment on them. Instead he watched the water running on the ice, and after a minute he asked abruptly, "How long will the ice hold, Sibou?" The Indian shook his head. "That is not to be told." He pointed across the river to where a tributary stream flowed into the main river. "The water comes down there and adds to the strength of this. It may break the ice here and spread over the surface. Listen." The corporal listened. The air was full of an indescribable sound, a moaning and growling quite different to the sound of the soft wind in the trees. "Already the water fights for mastery," said Sibou, "and tomorrow it may have won." "No, today," cried the corporal quickly, as there came a sudden crash far out in front, and the next moment a gaping fissure showed in the ice. "Yes, today," assented the Indian as he watched. "That is the first and there will be others. The break-up has come. The spring has arrived." A cry from the camp startled them, and divining what had happened, the white man began to run. When he reached the fire he found Joy standing by his cousin. Her eyes were burning with tears. He looked at her, and as her eyes met she answered the question in his. "Yes," she said, "a moment ago. He knew me again at the last." Roger Bracknell took a step forward and looked into the still face of his cousin. To him it seemed extraordinarily peaceful, and the half smile on the lips caught and held by death, told its own story. "He was happy in his death," he said, "happier than in life. Poor old Dick." He turned away, leaving Joy alone with the dead for a little while. He knew that his cousin's death meant release for her, and for himself also, since it would remove the bands of silence from him. But in that moment he refused to think of that aspect of the matter, and as with the help of Sibou he bent a couple of young spruces, that his cousin's body might have the aerial sepulchre practised by the northern tribes. He reflected how much of good there was in Dick, and how many such there are who, having taken the wrong turn, miss the full purpose of life. Half an hour later the dead man was lashed to the young trees, which were released, carrying the body high in the air. Such portions of the burial service as Roger could remember were recited, and then with Joy he turned towards the camp. "We will start in an hour if you like," he said. "The ice is not very good, but it will be worse tomorrow, and we can get some way towards Chief Louis' camp. Once there, ice or no ice will not matter. We shall be able to get canoes." "Yes," she said. "Yes, in an hour. There is no reason why we should linger here now." They started before the hour was out, and travelled hard until the edge of dark, avoiding fissures which were ever increasing, and pitched camp several miles away from their last resting place. In the night the corporal was awakened by a crash somewhere on the river in front, and in the morning he knew that sled travelling was over till the Northland winter should once more bind the rivers. A stream of water was flowing on the surface of the ice. There were fissures everywhere, and a distant rumble told him that somewhere the ice was breaking up. Sibou came and joined him, and together they looked across the river. Something caught the Indian's keener eyes, something moving. He pointed it out to Bracknell. "There's a man there. He's coming this way." The corporal looked intently for a moment, then he agreed. "Yes, it is a man. He's alone. He has no dogs." "Maybe they are lost," said the Indian. "He will never get across," commented Bracknell, "and we cannot warn him. He will have to return." The Indian shaded his eyes against the rising sun and watched. Then he said, "He walks strangely." Bracknell himself thought so. The man, whoever he was, seemed to be making an erratic course, and more than once just skirted a fissure. 20 minutes passed, and then the two were joined by Joy and her foster sister. "What are you watching?" asked Joy. The corporal pointed to the man, now a little more than 100 yards away. Joy looked and cried out, and just at that moment Sibou started. "The man is blind," he said. "See how he walks, hands in front, groping for the way. Behold, he did not see the ice." The stranger, whoever he was, had stumbled over a cake of ice thrown out on the surface, and as he picked himself up, he took his next step into a stream running fast over the yielding surface. He withdrew the foot instantly, and half turned to try another course. "It is a snow blindness," said Sibou. "He cannot see. He only feels, and there is danger everywhere for him." "Oh," cried Joy, "can nothing be done?" "Something can be tried," answered the corporal, beginning to get down the bank. Sibou followed him, and they moved towards the blinded man in imminent risk of their lives. The ice seemed to be in movement everywhere, and the noise out in the river was increasing. Even as they stepped on the ice it broke loose from the bank, and the rescuers felt it shake beneath their feet. Cracks appeared through which the water spurted, but they moved forward, for both were aware that the ice beneath them might be thrown into the air as by some living monster, and themselves thrown into the swirling water. A providence seemed to watch over the blinded man. He had turned again, and now was running towards them. With a luck that was almost uncanny, he passed a couple of yawning cavities from which the water welled, and once he put his foot on emptiness. He leaped from the other foot and crossed the danger before him at a bound. They were but 15 yards apart when suddenly Sibou stood and gripped his companion's arm. "Behold," he said quickly, "the man who was with me when the trail was blown up before Mr. Gargrave." Roger Bracknell also stood still, and looked at the figure shambling towards them. There was a distraught look on the man's face, a madness of fear that convulsed it, but in spite of that Roger Bracknell recognized it. It was the face of Adrian Rayner. While he stood there, stunned and held inactive by the recognition, there was a sound of splintering at the corporal's feet, and instinctively both he and Sibou leaped backward. The ice parted, and a little lane of turgid water appeared between them and the snow-blind man. The latter still came on. Roger Bracknell watched him like a man hypnotized, but when Rayner had almost reached the place where the fracture had occurred, he cried out suddenly in agonized warning. "Look out, Rayner! For God's sake, look out!" His cry must have been heard by Rayner, for the latter halted suddenly and threw up his arm as if to ward off a blow. Then he gave a great cry of fear, and turning suddenly, began to run away from the bank. He ran fast, helped by some great impulse of fear, but he ran only a little way. A stretch of open water appeared in the line he followed, and unconscious of its existence, he ran straight into it. They saw the plunge and watched painfully. A moment later his head appeared above the water and disappeared again as the rush of water hurled him forward. There was no further sign of him, and as delay was dangerous, both of them turned and raced for the bank. As they gained it, the corporal saw a look of horror on Joy Gargrave's face. "Who was the man?" she asked. "I seem to recognize something about him." "It was Adrian Rayner." "I guessed it. I knew it. You recognized him when you stopped?" "Sibou recognized him first," replied the corporal meaningly. "Sibou, I did not know that he—" "Oh, I remember. He was with the man who was responsible for my father's death." "Yes, and Adrian Rayner was the man." Joy was silent for a moment, her eyes fixed on the place where her cousin had met his death. There was an enigmatic look in them which made Roger Bracknell wonder. Then she spoke again. "You halted when you recognized him. You would not help him?" "It was not that," he answered quickly. "It was just amazement that held me for a minute. Amazement and a feeling of horror that my suspicions were proved right, though for weeks I have been sure that Adrian Rayner was the guilty man. He would have stepped into open water if I had not suddenly cried out. I think he heard me. I think he may have recognized my voice. He may have been startled, though I think he was afraid at hearing his name called out when he was without knowledge that anyone was near. As you saw, he turned and ran, but I saw his face as he stopped at my hail, and it was stark with fear." After a few seconds the girl spoke again, her eyes still on the tumult of the river. "He was alone," she said, "snow-blind. I wonder how that came about. He had 2 Indians with him when he started." "He may have lost them, have wandered from the camp, or something of that sort. Or they may have deserted him, carrying away the outfit. In any case, what has happened, terrible as it is probably for the best. Rayner's death saves him a trial for murder, and the past need not be raked up." Joy nodded and looked once more to where the broken floes were grinding each other in the waters which had engulfed the guilty man. "It is the judgment of God." It was 5½ months later when Roger Bracknell, fresh from England, walked up the road from the river leading to North Star Lodge. There was a touch of frost in the air, and already the wild geese were moving southward, and he heard their honk, honk, as they flew over his head for the warmer lands of the south. But he never so much as lifted his eyes to look at them. His gaze was fixed on the place where the road turned, eagerly expectant, and from behind came the voyageur's song as his men unpacked the boat. "What is there like to the laughing star, far up from the lilac tree? A face that's brighter and finer far, it laughs and it shines, see, see." The honk of the geese overhead for a moment drowned the words, but they reached him again a moment later. "Till I go forth and bring it home, a house if within my door, row along home, see, see." Then he turned the corner of the road. A girl was hurrying between the long lines of trees. It was Joy Gargrave. There was no laughter on her face, but the blood was warm in it, and her eyes were shining. "Oh, my dear," she said, half sobbing with gladness as he took her in his arms. At last, he whispered. Then together they turned and walked towards the lodge. "Babette?" he inquired. "She is well." Then Joy laughed gaily. "She had the good sense to remain indoors. You know she is going to be married?" "No." "It has been arranged a long time, before you ever came to North Star. But the little minx only told me the other day, when she knew that you were really coming back." "Who is the man?" "An American engineer, James Sherlock. He came here once or twice in the old days when my father was alive. He is a very fine man." "I hope she will be happy." "There is no doubt of that," answered Joy. "But she will not be as happy as we shall. But what news is there from England? My uncle?" Roger Bracknell's face grew a little graver as he looked at her. Then he said quietly, "I think I'd better tell you at once and dismiss the unpleasantness once and for all. I told him of his son's death without telling him all that lay behind it. It was a great shock to him, and for a little time he broke down completely. He seemed to regard it as in some way a judgment on himself, and he made a confession to me." "A confession?" Joyce stopped and looked at him with eyes that were wide with fear. "You do not mean that he knew that Adrian intended—" "He knew nothing, not even of your marriage with Dick. And even now he does not know that your father's death was anything but accidental. He was, I could tell, in complete ignorance of the real object of his son's journey here, and thought it had to do with his confessed infatuation for you. The confession he made had to do with his financial affairs. It appears that he has speculated rashly, that his affairs had become very much involved, and that absolute control of your money was needed to save him." "I gave it," cried Joy. "Yes, and it did save him. Some of his ventures turned out very well after all. But that matters nothing now. Adrian was the apple of his eye, and his loss, as I said, he regarded as a personal judgment on himself, as he had first sent Adrian to North Star in the hope that the match he desired would come to pass." "But he did not know of Dick. He was not party to my cousin's schemes." "I am sure he was in absolute ignorance." "Thank God! He was always kind to me, and I could not bear to think that he was in my cousin's confidence. He wanted me to marry Adrian, but he thought that I was free. He is going out of business, and I have arranged with him to transfer your affairs to a firm that manages the Harrow Fell estates. When we go to England—" "When will that be?" asked Joy quickly. Roger Bracknell smiled. "There is no hurry. I thought I might winter up here, that is if you are agreeable." She looked at him reproachfully. "You know—" "Wait! You have not heard everything, Joy. Down the river I passed a missionary priest, Father Doherty. He is going north, racing the winter. He knows he has already lost the race, and that he will have to finish his journey on the ice. I ventured to persuade him to break the journey at the lodge, and he agreed to do so. It was very audacious of me." "Why should it be audacious? Travellers are always welcome at North Star." "Well," he answered smilingly, "he's a priest, you know." For a couple of seconds she looked at him wonderingly. Then comprehension came to her, and a blush mantled her face. "It was very audacious of you," she said. "Very. But—" "But what?" he asked. "I am glad that—" "Yes." "That Father Doherty is a priest." She laughed with gladness as he stooped to kiss her, and when they resumed their way she asked, "When will he arrive?" "Tomorrow, I think." "So soon?" "No, so long," he corrected smilingly. "And we shall have a winter honeymoon at North Star?" "Yes." "That," she said, "will be delightful." And as she spoke, through the trees the lodge appeared in sight, and to them drifted a fragment of the boatman's song: "Till I go forth and bring it home, and enter and close my door. Row along home, C.C." End of chapter 25. End of The Lady of the North Star by Ottwell BINNS. Recording by Richard Kilmer, San Antonio, Texas.